There's a moment in every life when the ground gives way, when the thing you spent years building, a marriage, a ministry, a dream, a family, is stripped bare before your eyes, and you stand in the ruins trying to remember what it looked like before. The theologians have a word for what happens next. They call it lamentation. But the people who have lived it do not reach for a theological word. They reach for something older, something that rises from deep in the chest, something that sounds less like a doctrine and more like a cry. Joel the prophet knew that cry. He had heard it in the streets of Jerusalem, carried on the wind to the valleys of Judah, echoing off the stone walls of homes where families stood looking at empty storehouses and trying to explain to their children why there was nothing left to eat. The locusts had come, not as metaphor, not as literary device. They had come as a living darkness that blotted the sun from the sky, that descended on standing crops like a judgment, that left behind them nothing but bare stalks and stripped earth in silence. A silence so heavy it felt like the land itself had forgotten how to breathe. Joel watched it happen, and then he did the most remarkable thing a prophet can do. He opened his mouth, and he declared that it was not over. That is the word that arrives today from the throne of the universe. It is not over. What the locust took is not the last sentence in the story God is writing over your life. And the years they consumed are not beyond his power to restore. Imagine a man named Samuel. He is 43 years old, and he lives in a town so small that there are more churches than traffic lights. He was raised in one of those churches, the kind with wooden pews worn smooth by decades of Sunday mornings. And his earliest memories are gospel music and the smell of pine oil and his grandmother's voice singing hymns in the back row like she was trying to reach something on the other side of the ceiling. He loved God early and sincerely, the way children love things before the world teaches them to be careful about loving too much. But then life happened to Samuel. It happens to all of us, and it does not announce itself. His father left when he was 11. His mother worked 2 jobs and was rarely home before dark. By the time he was 15, he had learned that the best way to stop aching for something you cannot have is to fill the space with something you can. And there was always something available. There was always somebody at the edge of the school parking lot with something that would make the quiet go away. He reached for it the way drowning people reach for anything floating. And before long, he was not drowning in silence anymore. He was drowning in something else entirely. The years that followed were locust years. Samuel himself would call them that later when he had the language for it. Years in which he watched everything get eaten. His 20s went first, the decade when other people had grown up and were building foundations, starting families, finding their footing. He spent those years circling the same drain, getting clean and relapsing, accumulating losses the way some people accumulate wisdom, a relationship that couldn't survive what he was. A job that lasted 3 months. An apartment he lost and never fully got back. A son he barely knew because the woman who bore him had done the right thing and put distance between her child and what Samuel had become. By 37, he had been sober for 7 months, which was the longest stretch in 20 years, and he was sitting in a recovery meeting in the basement of a Baptist church when the pastor came down to check on the group. The pastor was older, 70 if he was a day, and he had the kind of face that looked like it had survived considerable weather. He did not say much. He sat down at the back of the room, and he listened, and after the meeting ended, and people were folding chairs and putting away coffee cups, he walked over to Samuel and said something that Samuel would repeat for the rest of his life. He said, "God has been holding those years in trust for you." Samuel did not know what to do with that. He turned it over for weeks the way you turn a stone over in your hand, looking at it from different angles, unsure if what you were seeing is real or just a light playing tricks. He had heard restoration theology before, had grown up with it, but it had always sounded to him like a promise made to other people. People who had not wasted what he had wasted. People who had not made the choices he had made. The idea that God would restore his years felt less like good news and more like a reproach. A reminder of everything that was gone and would not be coming back. But God is patient with our unbelief. He does not argue. He simply demonstrates. Joel 2 verse 25 does not say that God will explain the locusts. It does not say that he will provide a theological framework for understanding why devastation happens to people who love him, why the faithful suffer alongside the faithless, why prayers that feel urgent and real sometimes appear to go unanswered for years at a stretch. God makes no such promise. What he promises is different and, in its way, more radical. He says, I will restore the years, not the days. The years. There is something enormously specific about that word. Years carry weight in a way that moments do not. When we speak of losing years, we are not speaking of a bad afternoon or a difficult season. We are speaking of stretches of our lives in which we became someone we did not intend to become, made choices we cannot unmake, watched opportunities close that will not reopen. Years are not recoverable by ordinary means. You cannot get a year back by working harder or praying more or simply resolving to do better. What was lost in those years is lost. The harvest is gone. The locusts have been and they have eaten. And God says, I will repay you. The Hebrew word used here carries the weight of a debt being settled. Not charity given to someone who has nothing, but a ledger being balanced. What was taken is being returned, with everything that implies. The years themselves were not wasted in God's economy. Even when they appeared to produce nothing but ruin, he was doing something in the consuming that prepared the ground for the restoring. He was working in the wasteland in ways that the person standing in the wasteland could not see and would not understand until later. Samuel began to understand this around the time his son turned 16. The boy's name was Micah, and he had grown up knowing only the shape of his father's absence. But Samuel was 7 years sober now, and he had been writing letters to Micah for 5 of those years, not asking for anything, not defending himself, just writing about his own journey and the God who had met him at the bottom and had not left. He wrote because he needed to write. He did not know if the letters were being read. They were being read. Micah was 16 and struggling in a way that 16-year-olds sometimes struggle. And one night when it was very late and the silence in his room was becoming unbearable, he reached into the drawer where he had kept every letter his father had ever sent him, and he read through them from the beginning. He read about his father's failures without flinching because his father had never dressed him up. He read about his father's restoration, and he recognized something in the telling of it, something that sounded like truth, because it was not triumphant or tidy, because it did not skip over the years in the valley. He called his father the next morning. It was the first phone call they had ever had. It lasted 4 hours. Restoration in God's hands rarely looks the way we imagine it will. We imagine it like a film rewinding, the damage undone, the missing years handed back whole, the harvest restored field by field, row by row, exactly as it was before the swarm came. But that is not how God restores. God does not rewind. He redeems. And redemption is not reversal. It is transformation. It takes what was lost and makes it into something that could not have existed without the loss. It takes the locust years and extracts from them a testimony that could not have been written any other way. Joseph understood this. He spent 13 years in a pit and a prison before the palace. And when he finally stood before his brothers who had sold him into slavery, he did not say, "Look at what God reversed." He said, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." The treachery had not been undone. The years had not been given back. But they had been woven into a purpose so large and so improbable that Joseph could only stand before it with his hands open. Ruth understood it. She walked into Bethlehem carrying nothing but grief and a mother-in-law and a determination to remain faithful to a God who had not yet explained himself. She gleaned at the edges of fields that were not hers, scraping together a living from the margins of someone else's harvest. And out of those years of gleaning, out of those years of faithfulness in the face of loss, God built a lineage that led directly to David the king and further still to manger in Bethlehem, where the whole story was finally resolved. Paul understood it from a Roman prison cell, his hands chained, his freedom gone, his plans for further journeys suspended indefinitely. He wrote letters. He wrote because he had no other instrument, and because the Spirit was moving in him, and the words had to go somewhere. Those letters became the New Testament. Those chained hands wrote the words that have shaped the faith of 2,000 years of believers. The prison did not stop the restoration. The prison was part of the restoration. Nothing is wasted in God's economy. Not your grief years. Not your wandering years. Not the years you spent in habits that diminish you or relationships that damage you or silence that seem to contain nothing but your own failure echoing back at you. Not the years of depression or addiction or doubt or wrong roads followed to their dead ends. Not the years you spent waiting for something that appeared not to be coming, holding a faith that felt smaller every season, wondering if the God who had seemed so present in the beginning had simply moved on. He has not moved on. He does not move on. He is a restorer, and restoration is his nature, and the locust years in your story are not the final word he intends to speak over your life. Samuel is now 51 years old. He leads a recovery ministry at the church where that old pastor first said the words that lodged in his chest like a seed, waiting for rain. He sits every week with people who are standing in the ruins of their locust years, and he tells them what he knows, which is that God does not waste loss, and that the years that feel irretrievable are not beyond his hand to redeem. He tells them about his son Micah, who is 26 now and who stood beside him at the altar last spring when Samuel married a woman named Grace. Because sometimes God's restoration has a sense of humor about names. He tells them that the testimony they will one day carry was being formed in the very years they most wish they could erase. He tells them, God holds those years in trust for you. Somewhere in this present moment, there's a field that looks like devastation, bare ground where harvest should be, silence where there should be growth, stripped stalks standing in the evidence of everything that was taken. And it is real. The loss is real. The years are genuinely gone. There is no point in pretending otherwise, no spiritual productivity in talking yourself out of what your eyes can plainly see. But the word of the Lord stands in that field today, and it does not mourn the devastation. It speaks over it. It says, I am a God who restores. I am a God who repays. The years the enemy consumed are in my ledger, and the account has not been forgotten, and the settling of it is coming. And when it comes, it will not look like mere repair or modest improvement or partial return on what was invested.